Here we keep you entertained by our folk tales and true life stories. Please subscribe to our channel as it means the world to us. Also, please like, share, and comment on this channel for more exclusive contents. Now sit back and relax as we take you through the most wonderful epistle. Amira Sullivan had always been the kind of woman people described as steady. Born in the tranquil suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina, she was the only child of Rose Sullivan, a retired schoolteacher with a love for herbal teas and quiet Sunday mornings, and Thomas Sullivan, a former librarian who once dreamed of writing historical novels. Her childhood was filled with the smell of paperbacks, piano recitals on rainy weekends, and jazz records that played softly through the speakers while her mother read poetry aloud. From a young age, Amira loved stories, both the kind bound between covers and the ones told by the expressions in people's eyes. She pursued marketing not because she loved business, but because she understood people, what they wanted, what they hid, and how they spoke even in silence. In college, she volunteered with elderly veterans, managed fundraising galas, and organized art showcases. She wasn't flashy or loud, but her presence was unforgettable, soft-spoken but impactful, kind but unyielding, gentle but never weak. Her dreams weren't grandiose, they were rich in intention, designing community centers, helping underprivileged youth, and maybe one day starting a boutique interior studio that fused wellness with aesthetics. At 27, she wasn't looking for love. But love, as fate would have it, was looking for her. It was during an alumni networking conference in Chicago that Amira met Damien Crestwood. The ballroom of the Conrad Hotel buzzed with energy, wine glasses clinking, investors talking stock trends, old classmates swapping stories like playing cards. Amira had been assigned to coordinate brand sponsorships, an opportunity through her consulting firm. Damien had been one of the keynote panelists, sharp-tongued, confident, dazzling in an Armani three-piece and a charisma that filled the room like cologne. He was everything Amira typically avoided, fast-talking, surgically ambitious, and a bit too polished. But when they bumped into each other near the hallway espresso bar, her balancing a stack of portfolios, him holding his phone and not looking, they exchanged apologies and laughter that felt oddly genuine. "I usually charm people with words, not coffee spills," Damien had joked, helping her gather the scattered brochures. For a brief moment, something clicked. He asked about her work, she asked why he seemed so guarded behind his charm. Their conversation lasted 15 minutes. It should have ended there. But 3 days later, she received a call from an unknown number. "Hey," the voice said, warm and confident, "I've had coffee 10 times since, but none tasted as good as the one I ruined. Can we try again, less messy this time?" Against her better judgment and Nina's loud warnings, she said yes. Their courtship wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own right. Damien, though deeply entrenched in corporate battles, softened around Amira in ways that surprised even himself. He told her about his upbringing in New Jersey, how his mother raised him after his father disappeared, how he learned to survive by being sharper, quicker, and more driven than everyone else. He wasn't good at vulnerability, but Amira didn't demand it. She earned it slowly, through midnight walks and quiet dinners where the world faded away. They talked about dreams, his of one day becoming partner at Armitage & Cole, hers of opening an art therapy studio downtown. Damien started leaving notes in her books, buying her favorite mint tea before she asked, and rearranging his schedule just to spend more time watching sunsets from her apartment window. When he proposed 2 years later during a surprise getaway to Monterey Bay, it felt like the world had paused just for them. He had whispered, "You bring peace to my chaos, Amira. I don't know how to be a man in this world, but I want to try, with you." And she, heart trembling, said yes because at that moment, she believed they were building a life grounded in love. What she didn't know then was that love, no matter how deeply rooted, could still be poisoned at the core if trust was cracked. And the cracks? They had already begun, but neither of them dared look close enough to see how deep they ran. Damien Crestwood had always seen the world as a game of strategy, a place where survival depended not on sincerity but sharpness. Raised in a 2-bedroom walk-up in Newark, he was the only son of Marlene Crestwood, a former cocktail waitress with a mouth like a whip and a heart calcified by hardship. His father, Clarence, left when Damien was 8, never returning after one explosive argument that ended with a shattered mirror and Marlene swearing she'd raise her son to never need any damn man, even if he shares your blood. That was the night Damien stopped crying and started calculating. His mother, for all her flaws, taught him to be precise. Charm them, baby, she'd say while fixing her lipstick in the bathroom mirror, and if charm doesn't work, outwork them. He took her advice to heart, graduating top of his class in business school, mastering the corporate dialect of ambition, and learning to smile just wide enough to make people lean in, but never close enough to let them in. Damien didn't fall in love, he selected it. And in Amira, he saw something he lacked, softness, peace, something real. But deep down, he wasn't sure he deserved her, or that he even knew what to do with someone who didn't want anything from him but truth. At first, Amira had mistaken his quiet possessiveness for protectiveness, his calculated routines for dependability. He had rules, always answered emails before breakfast, refused to eat at chain restaurants, only wore navy or gray to meetings. Discipline is the language of power, he told her once, as if explaining the weather. But over time, that discipline bled into control. If she changed her hair without telling him, he'd say she should have waited for a client meeting to pass. If she cried during a movie, he'd pat her knee awkwardly and mutter, "That's just fiction, babe." When they argued, he never yelled. That would be too unsophisticated. Instead, he used words like weapons, passive, cold, dipped in silence. He once told her, after she'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning, "I need a partner who doesn't crumble at the basics." It wasn't said in anger, it was said with expectation, like he was assessing a candidate for a role. Amira, raised in warmth and gentle reminders, didn't know what to make of this cold, pristine kind of affection. But each time she tried to confront it, Damien would apologize with dinner, gifts, and promises. "I just want to build something real with you," he'd say, and she'd believe him, because she wanted to. Because he wasn't cruel, not in the way the world defines cruelty. But that made it harder to see the damage he caused. Harder to name the bruises he left on her heart. As Damien climbed the ladder at Armitage & Cole, his presence changed even more. He no longer just wanted to succeed, he wanted to be untouchable. The firm's cutthroat environment rewarded sharks, and Damien became one of the most feared young strategists on the East Coast. He brought in million-dollar clients, dismantled competitor accounts, and was nicknamed Crestblade behind closed doors. His colleagues admired him, but no one really liked him. That didn't bother Damien, he didn't need to be liked, only obeyed. At home, Amira tried to maintain their rituals, Sunday brunches, Thursday jazz nights, Friday puzzles on the balcony. But Damien was always on call, or needed at HQ, or caught in client follow-up. The man who once watched the sunset with her every evening now barely noticed when she fell asleep on the couch waiting. His charm became mechanical, his smile curated, his affection obligatory. And still, Amira told herself it was a phase. She told herself this was what power looked like. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that Damien was no longer building a life with her. He was auditioning for one without her. And somewhere in the shadows of his success, something colder had already begun to take root. 6 months into their third year of marriage, Amira found herself in the emergency room, her palms trembling as she stared at the flat line on the monitor. The ultrasound had stopped showing movement. Their baby, only 13 weeks in the womb, had no heartbeat. The nurse placed a hand on her shoulder with the practiced tenderness of someone used to tragedy, but Amira couldn't process it. It was supposed to be a routine checkup. Damien hadn't even come, he was in Manhattan for a corporate pitch. "I'll FaceTime after the meeting," he texted. But when she called with shaking fingers, her voice barely a whisper, he answered with a sigh, "I'm about to go in. Can I call you in an hour?" That hour never came. Amira cried alone, her mother's arms thousands of miles away, Nina and Keisha both out of state for work. In that sterile, cold hospital room, she lost not just her child, but something unspoken in her marriage. Something irreplaceable. In the weeks that followed, Damien became more emotionally distant, hiding behind the veil of "I process things differently." He didn't bring it up unless she did, and when she did, it was always the same response: "We'll try again when it's right." But Amira didn't want to try again. She wanted to grieve, to mourn, to understand why the man she married couldn't even hold her while she bled alone in their bathroom 2 nights after the hospital visit. He barely noticed when she stopped cooking, when her laughter vanished, or when she no longer played Coltrane on Sunday mornings. Instead, he buried himself deeper into his work. She began seeing late-night notifications pop up on his phone from unfamiliar names. Giselle M. appeared more than once, often with messages like "finished that deck for you" or "want me to grab you dinner?" Amira mentioned it once, gently. He brushed it off. She's a new junior exec. Hungry for success. That's all. The way he said hungry lingered in her mind far longer than it should have. But she didn't confront him again. She was too tired. Too broken. Too focused on trying to feel whole again. By now, Amira had begun spending more time with her longtime best friend, Keisha Monroe, a fiercely independent architect known for her sharp tongue and sharper wardrobe. Keisha had always been skeptical of Damien, even during their engagement. "He loves you, but he's not ready for the kind of woman you are," she warned once over wine and takeout. Amira dismissed it at the time, chalked it up to Keisha's protective nature, but now she wasn't so sure. She also started opening up more to her cousin, Nina Sullivan, a high school counselor with a master's in behavioral psychology and a knack for sensing tension even through phone calls. They became her quiet support system, the only ones who saw behind her composed facade. Damien, meanwhile, was always away: team retreats, late-night strategy dinners, emergency client meetings. Amira stopped checking. What she didn't realize was that Giselle Moore wasn't just a junior executive. She was already laying the groundwork to become something more. And Damien, in his blindness or perhaps his design, was slowly letting her in. Not into his heart, but into Amira's place. The evening air outside Charleston's waterfront was crisp with the scent of sea salt and distant jasmine as Amira waited at the family-owned restaurant where her parents had celebrated their 40th anniversary just months before. The Sullivan family had planned a small gathering for her father's retirement, a table for 12 with seafood platters and homemade chocolate cake. Damien had promised to come. He had texted that morning, wouldn't miss it for the world. But as the hours passed, her smile grew thinner with each glance at the door. The chair beside her remained empty. After 3 missed calls and 1 voicemail that said simply, "Got held up. Client emergency. Sorry." Amira excused herself from the table. In the restroom, she stared at herself in the mirror, lipstick perfect, earrings matching her soft pink dress, mascara barely holding back tears. Her father noticed, of course, but said nothing. Just gave her a sad nod. In that quiet moment, she understood something. She had become accustomed to being an afterthought in her own marriage. The next morning, Amira scrolled through her phone in bed while Damien slept beside her, lips slightly parted, phone still clutched in his hand. A text caught her eye, a photo of Damien and Giselle, laughing at a private lounge, glasses in hand, shoulders too close, posted by Keisha's cousin, Selah, a PR executive who'd been at the same venue. "Your husband's not exactly low-key," read Selah's caption with a flame emoji. Amira stared at it in silence, her fingers trembling over the screen. The image wasn't proof of infidelity, but it screamed betrayal all the same. When she brought it up gently over breakfast, Damien waved it off. Giselle was there. Big deal. It was a networking thing. Selah's always dramatic. He didn't even apologize, just continued sipping his black coffee and checking email. That morning, she made a decision: no more asking. She would start observing. Documenting. And slowly, without fanfare, she began emotionally detaching from the man she once planned forever with. Every laugh now felt rehearsed. Every compliment sounded hollow. The cracks weren't just showing, they were splintering. Later that week, while delivering Damien's forgotten laptop to his downtown office, Amira had a brief, unexpected encounter with Jared Kane, the enigmatic CEO of Armitage & Cole. Jared was known in business circles as a ghost, always present, never seen, incredibly private. Amira had only met him once before at a charity auction Damien dragged her to, but she hadn't expected him to remember her. "Mrs. Crestwood," he said warmly, rising from his chair as she entered. He had kind eyes, surprisingly kind for someone worth billions. He offered her water and asked if she was doing okay, his voice sincere, a rarity in a world of pretense. For a moment, she hesitated, caught off guard by his attentiveness. "I'm all right," she answered, her voice soft. But Jared's eyes lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "You don't look all right," he said, before gently changing the subject. That 10-minute conversation stayed with her for days. Because in a world where Damien saw through her, Jared, a stranger, saw into her. It was the soft click of Damien's car door that alerted Amira he was finally home, well past midnight. He moved with the careful footsteps of a man who didn't want to wake the dead or the disappointed. She stayed in bed, pretending to sleep as he slipped into the closet to hang his coat. But when morning came and he rushed off again, forgetting the small leather jewelry pouch she'd asked him to drop off at the cleaners, Amira decided to fetch it herself from the back seat of his car. What she didn't expect to find was a lipstick tube, rose gold casing, plum-colored tip, and a brand Amira didn't wear, wedged between the seat and the floor mat. It was lying next to a satin scrunchie that didn't belong to her. Her fingers gripped the lipstick like a blade. She walked back inside, heart pounding, and sat in silence. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she set it carefully on the kitchen counter, waiting for the truth to arrive disguised as another excuse. When Damien returned that evening, Amira asked him directly, "Whose lipstick was in your car?" He didn't flinch. Didn't ask which one. Just gave a practiced shrug. "Probably Keisha's. You know how she always leaves stuff in people's cars. Or maybe Nina's." Amira's expression didn't change. "Neither of them has been in your car in 6 months. There was a pause, small, sharp, suffocating. He turned his back to her and muttered, "Don't start acting paranoid. You've been on edge since." Everything. Her mind flashed back to the miscarriage, the hospital, the cold space between them growing like a canyon. But this wasn't grief anymore. It was erosion. Damien hadn't even bothered to hide it well. She knew the lipstick belonged to someone who was in his car often, too often. Amira's instincts whispered a name. Giselle. She thought of her Instagram post, the flirtatious caption Sayla caught, and the text messages with too many winks. The lipstick wasn't proof of betrayal in the legal sense, but it was all the confirmation her heart needed. And yet, she said nothing. She wanted to see how far he was willing to take the lie. That night, Amira opened her journal for the first time in months. Beneath the soft glow of her reading lamp, she began to write, not just about the lipstick, but about the feeling of being erased one quiet betrayal at a time. Her words poured out like blood from a hidden wound. "He lies to me with ease now. I wonder when I became disposable." The entries turned from reflections into records. Names, dates, receipts, observations. She became her own investigator, watching her life unravel while wearing her wedding ring like armor. When she met with Nina over lunch the following weekend, she finally opened up. "I found lipstick in his car," she whispered over her untouched salad. Nina didn't flinch. "Do you want the truth, or do you want hope?" Amira's eyes welled up. "I don't even know anymore." Nina reached across the table. "Then let's find out together." Unbeknownst to Amira, Giselle Moore was not just a fling or a distraction. She was a strategist, and she had no intention of being a secret for much longer. The first time Amira smelled the unfamiliar perfume, it was faint, a ghost of jasmine and sandalwood that clung to Damien's shirt collar as she folded laundry in their bedroom. She paused, nose lingering near the fabric. It was too bold, too seductive, and not hers. But she said nothing. Maybe it was a colleague's hug, she reasoned. Maybe it was nothing. But nothing returned 2 days later when she changed their bedsheets. The pillow on Damien's side reeked of the same fragrance, stronger this time, as if someone had lain there for hours. And beneath the mattress, her hand brushed against a paper bag. Inside, a receipt for a luxury lingerie set from LhTS, size small, dated 2 days after her miscarriage. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. There was no note, no apology, no explanation, just silence and betrayal printed in black ink. Amira stared at their bed, the same bed they once made love in after toasting to their future. Now it felt like a grave. She waited until he got home to confront him, her voice low but steady. "Who is she?" Damien had just loosened his tie, clearly not expecting a storm. He scoffed at first, as if the accusation was beneath him. "What are you talking about now?" Amira held up the receipt. The scent. The sheets. The silence. "Don't insult me further by pretending you don't know." His face darkened. "You're spiraling again," he said coldly, grabbing the receipt from her hand and ripping it in two. "You want to turn this into some soap opera? Fine. Maybe I should have been more careful. Maybe if you didn't shut down every time life got hard, we wouldn't be here." The word sliced her. Her miscarriage, her pain, had now become his excuse. Her hands shook, not from fear but fury. "You weren't careful. Not with me. Not with this marriage. And definitely not with her." He laughed bitterly. "You act like this wasn't coming. You haven't been present in months." Amira stared at him, realizing in that moment that he wasn't sorry. Not for the cheating. Not for the gaslighting. Not even for breaking her. He was only sorry he got caught. That night, Amira couldn't sleep. She lay curled on the farthest edge of the bed, eyes wide open, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. Damien had gone to the guest room after slamming the door. He didn't return, and she didn't expect him to. She clutched a pillow to her chest and let the tears fall, silent, hot, relentless. Somewhere in the stillness of 2 a.m., she reached for her wedding photo on the nightstand and stared at it. Her smile, once radiant, now felt like a stranger's. She pressed it against her chest like a goodbye. She wasn't ready to leave, yet, but something inside her had cracked open, something that would never close the same way again. Meanwhile, across the city, Giselle Moore sat at a private rooftop lounge in a black silk dress, sipping champagne and smiling at her phone. "He didn't deny me this time," she texted a friend. "It's only a matter of time before I become Mrs. Crestwood." And for the first time in her life, Amira Sullivan realized her enemy wasn't just the woman in the shadows. It was the man who once vowed to protect her from the darkness, only to become it himself. The invitation arrived on creamy cardstock with gold-embossed lettering, Armitage and Cole Quarterly Executive Dinner Attendance Required. Damien tossed it on the kitchen counter like a receipt. "Company dinner." "You're coming," he said flatly while knotting his tie. Amira hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse, to reject the charade of playing the perfect wife. But something inside her shifted, not weakness, but curiosity. She wanted to see how far the mask would stretch before it cracked. That evening, she wore a charcoal evening dress with a sheer neckline, minimal makeup, and the same red lipstick she used on their first date, a subtle act of defiance. As she stepped out of the bedroom, Damien barely glanced up. "You look fine," he muttered. At the hotel ballroom, filled with warm lighting and clinking glasses, Damien immediately blended in with the sharks, floating from executive to client with practiced charm. Amira remained by his side like a shadow, ignored and polished, present only in form, not in sentiment. Across the room, Jared Kane sipped from a crystal tumbler, eyes scanning the crowd until they paused on her. He hadn't expected her to attend. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and Amira offered a small nod, the kind that says, "I'm surviving." Jared approached with the measured grace of a man used to commanding silence. "Mrs. Crestwood," he said with a respectful tilt of his head. "Nice to see you here." Damien interrupted before Amira could respond, draping a hand around her waist a touch too tightly. "Jared. Great turnout tonight." Jared's gaze didn't move. It's a pleasure to see the both of you. His tone was smooth, but Amira could hear the subtext, I see the performance. They spoke briefly before Jared was pulled away by another board member. But that moment lingered. Damien leaned in, whispering through gritted teeth, do not embarrass me tonight. Amira said nothing. She simply smiled and took a sip of her wine, knowing full well that his grip around her was the only thing he had left to control. The illusion cracked when Giselle Moore entered, her black dress hugging every curve, her hair in waves like she'd walked out of a perfume commercial. She wasn't invited, but she didn't care. She strutted in confidently, flashing smiles, and positioned herself at a nearby table with a group of young executives. Her eyes met Amira's across the candlelit table. There was no shame, no remorse, only satisfaction. Damien stiffened. Amira caught it instantly. His eyes darted to Giselle, then back to his wine glass. Throughout the dinner, Giselle made a spectacle of her laughter, her gaze occasionally resting on Damien like a silent dare. Amira never flinched. She maintained perfect posture, her smile gentle but unreadable. She laughed when appropriate, clinked glasses with bored wives, and carried herself like royalty, but inside, her fury brewed like a storm beneath calm waters. That night, as the driver took them home in silence, Damien broke the tension with a single line, don't overthink tonight. She was just trying to provoke you. Amira looked out the window and replied softly, you already did that for her. Amira had always loved birthdays, not for the gifts or parties, but for the quiet intention behind them. Every year, she looked forward to Damien's tradition of making her breakfast in bed, leaving handwritten notes on the bathroom mirror, and taking her to the jazz club downtown where they'd slow danced once under golden lights. But this year, when she woke up to silence, no aroma of eggs or sound of running water, she tried to convince herself he was planning something bigger. Noon passed. Then 3. Then 5. She texted him, what time should I be ready? No reply. She checked the fridge, empty. The counter, bare. Not even a card. The hours dragged on like wet concrete. At 7:46 p.m., Damien's Instagram story lit up, a photo of him in a private lounge with colleagues, champagne in hand, and beside him, unmistakably, was Giselle, her hand on his knee. The caption read, celebrating wins. Big deals, bigger nights. Her birthday wasn't mentioned once. Amira didn't scream. She didn't throw her phone or cry on the floor. Instead, she changed into a black halter dress, applied eyeliner with steady hands, and texted Nina and Keisha, drinks? Now. Within the hour, they were at Lumiere, a candlelit rooftop bar that overlooked the city skyline. Keisha, never one to mince words, muttered, you're too elegant to be crying over a man who dresses like a boardroom and thinks that counts as substance. Nina added, you need to stop trying to fix something he's already given away. The words stung, but they were true. Amira sipped her drink in silence, until a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find Jared Kane, alone, in a charcoal coat and no entourage. Ladies, he said with a nod, before focusing on Amira. You look like someone trying to pretend they're not disappointed. Her lips twitched in a half-smile. And you look like someone who sees more than he should. They talked for a long while, about music, betrayal, choices, and everything in between. Jared didn't offer solutions or pity, just presence. A kind, calm presence that said, you're not invisible. Not tonight. By the time the evening ended, Amira felt something she hadn't in months seen. Jared walked them to the valet, stopping her gently before she stepped into the car. He doesn't see you, but someone else does. Even if it's just yourself. She nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel comforted or called out. Back at home, the apartment was dark. Damien still wasn't back. On the coffee table was a delivery box, gift-wrapped in gold. Inside was a bracelet. No card. No message. Just cold metal. Amira slid it onto her wrist and looked in the mirror, wondering how something could shine so brightly while meaning absolutely nothing. She walked to the balcony, her fingers tracing the glass, staring out at the city. Her birthday had ended, but the damage it left behind had just begun. And somewhere deep within, something fierce started to breathe again, not rage, not revenge, clarity. In the quiet stillness of his hotel room, Damien stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, a whiskey glass in one hand and a hollow ache beneath his ribs. Giselle had fallen asleep across the suite in nothing but the hotel robe and ambition. He should have felt victorious. He had the power, the mistress, the penthouse view, yet what he felt was a strange, choking kind of emptiness. His reflection didn't lie to him the way his words did to others. It reminded him of another mirror, years ago in his childhood home, cracked from a thrown bottle, reflecting a bruised version of his mother slumped against the wall. His father's voice echoed in his mind, slurred and furious. "You think the world owes you softness? Toughen up or it'll kill you." Damien had been 10, hiding behind a curtain, watching the woman who raised him spit blood onto their kitchen floor. That was the day he learned silence was armor, and affection was a liability. Now, years later, his armor had turned into apathy, and his guilt was like wallpaper, always there, barely noticed. Giselle stirred from the bed, murmuring something about brunch and how HlTS still hadn't approved her lateral move to strategy. Damien grunted in reply, his mind elsewhere. Giselle's grip on him was tightening. She'd started showing up at more of his client meetings, inserting herself into boardroom conversations, and casually name-dropping her proximity to him like a calling card. "If you're serious about me," she whispered the night before, "then why are we still hiding?" He gave her the same excuse he'd given Amira countless times, timing. But even he no longer believed it. Amira was slipping from his control. She was growing quiet in ways that felt dangerous. She no longer cried, no longer asked where he was. Her silence was beginning to mirror his mother's, the kind that preceded storms. And worst of all, HlTS had noticed her. Damien saw it in the way Jared looked at Amira, like she was something rare, something fragile and powerful at once. It made him uneasy. The same way his father once looked at his mother's younger sister before things fell apart. Back at home, Amira sat by the window in her office, flipping through an old photo album, one they made together the first year of their marriage. There was a picture of Damien grinning, hair tousled, arms around her at a vineyard. She remembered that day, how he laughed when the wind knocked over the cheese board, how he kissed her nose and called her my calm. Now she couldn't recall the last time he said her name without a sigh. Keisha called to confirm dinner plans, and Amira almost said no, but something inside urged her to get out. "I'm tired of this house," she confessed softly. "It smells like a past I didn't agree to live in." As she walked into the hallway, she caught her reflection in the mirror, her eyes hollow, but her spine straighter. "We got the gala invite," Keisha mentioned casually over the phone. "Damien's firm is sponsoring. You going?" Amira stared at the envelope on the counter and replied without flinching, "Yes. Let him see what it looks like when someone stops begging to be loved." And in that moment, she didn't realize the gala would be the place where everything, past, present, and future, would collide like glass shattering on marble. The Grand Lysandra Hotel shimmered like a palace under moonlight, its marble staircases adorned with violet orchids and cascading lights. Inside, the gala buzzed with opulence and networking, senators, billionaires, corporate giants, all sipping champagne and air-kissing each other's egos. The press flooded the velvet rope entrance, flashing bulbs catching every detail, especially when Damien Crestwood stepped out of a sleek silver coupe, sharp in a midnight black tux, with Giselle Moore clinging to his arm. Her dress, emerald silk, backless, and attention-hungry, left no question about her intentions. They posed briefly, and when a reporter asked, "Where's your wife tonight?" Damien laughed and replied coolly, "Inside, I'm sure. It's business." But Amira wasn't inside. Not yet. She arrived minutes later through the side entrance, escorted by Keisha and Nina, wearing a custom silver gown that hugged her like armor and made silence her weapon. The room hushed. Even HlTS, mid-conversation with an investor, paused when he saw her enter. His eyes followed her. And so did Damien's. From the moment Amira stepped into the room, she felt the tension shift like a dropped wine glass, fragile, poised to break. She walked past Damien without flinching, her posture regal, her perfume subtle but intentional. Giselle's smirk faltered for a second as Amira offered a cordial nod, as if greeting a mere acquaintance, not the woman who had unraveled her home. Keisha whispered, "That's how you win a war," without blinking. Amira's gaze met Jared's across the ballroom, and he raised his glass in acknowledgement. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. Throughout the evening, Damien played his role, working the room, making introductions, but he was off rhythm. His laugh too forced, his attention constantly trailing toward Amira. Giselle, though smiling, began to feel the pull of his restlessness. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "You invited her to remind yourself what you lost, didn't you?" Damien didn't answer. Because deep down, he didn't know if it was loss or guilt gnawing at him, only that something in the room was slipping out of his grasp, and it terrified him. Toward the end of the evening, as applause roared after Jared Kane's speech honoring the firm's philanthropic initiative, Amira quietly approached Damien. "We need to talk," she said simply, her voice even. "Now." He hesitated, glancing around. "Here?" She nodded toward the hallway near the restrooms. Privately. Giselle watched them go with narrowed eyes, fingers gripping her champagne flute. The hallway outside the main ballroom was dimly lit and quieter, insulated from the chaos. Amira walked with measured grace, while Damien followed with the tension of a man cornered. "What is it?" he asked as they reached the door to the private guest bathroom. She opened it and stepped inside. "Don't you want to explain to me what you were celebrating tonight?" Her tone was no longer wounded, it was surgical. And yet beneath her composure, her heart thundered. She had no idea that the next 10 minutes would shatter everything, not just her expectations, but her very body, and that the mirror above that sink would be the last thing she'd see before everything went dark. The bathroom was lavish, coated in marble and gold finishes, but it felt like a vault. The moment Damien stepped inside and shut the door, the hum of the GALA outside vanished behind thick walls, replaced by the charged silence between them. Amira stood near the sink, her back to the mirror, her silver gown reflecting the soft vanity lights. "You humiliated me tonight," she said quietly. Damien scoffed, "You humiliated yourself by showing up." That line was gasoline. Amira turned to face him, her voice low and trembling, but not with fear. "You brought her. You brought that woman to a public event. You didn't even have the decency to pretend anymore." Damien rolled his eyes. "Don't start this again. You've been cold for months. I had to find warmth somewhere." The words pierced through her like a blade. Amira stepped closer, eyes locked with his. "You didn't find warmth. You found destruction. And you're dragging me down with you." That was the moment he snapped. His hand moved faster than his mind. A shove, not brutal at first, but hard enough to make her stumble into the counter. "You're not going to talk to me like that," he growled. Amira regained her footing, chest rising and falling, not from weakness but fury. "Is this what it takes now? Violence to silence me?" Damien took a step forward, angrier now that she didn't cower. "You always play the victim. Always so perfect. Maybe you need to be reminded that you're not untouchable." Amira lifted her chin. "And maybe you need to remember that I'm not your mother, and I won't shrink for you." Something dark flickered in his eyes. With a sudden, sharp movement, he shoved her again, harder. Her heel slipped on the tile. Her head struck the marble sink with a sickening crack. And then silence. Her body collapsed to the floor in a motionless heap, her silver dress crumpled like wilted metal. Damien stood frozen. The silence screamed. "Amira," he whispered, crouching beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder, too afraid to touch. No response. No breath. No movement. Panic set in, wild and choking. He stared at the door, at her body, at the mirror that reflected his own twisted face. "She's just unconscious," he told himself. "She'll wake up. I just need time." But time wasn't something he had. His image. His career. The media. Jared. Giselle. Everything was spinning. Acting purely on impulse, Damien dragged Amira's limp form behind the door, stepped out, and shut it. Click. Then he turned the lock. He stood there for a moment, frozen, breath shallow. Then he walked away, his steps quickening, heart pounding. He returned to the ballroom where Giselle waited, drink in hand, brows raised. "Bathroom line," she teased. "Something like that," he murmured, grabbing her hand. "Let's go." As they slipped into the night, laughing, unaware of the chaos soon to come, Jared Kane, across the room, excused himself and headed toward the restroom. He didn't know it yet, but what he would find behind that door would change every life in that ballroom. Jared Kane pushed the heavy door to the guest bathroom, his steps quickening as he approached. He'd been holding it since his last conversation with the CFO, but when he twisted the knob, it refused to turn. Locked. Odd. It wasn't a public stall, it was a private executive restroom rarely used by more than one or two people at a time. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Still silence. Something in his gut twisted. Jared had spent years studying people, clients, investors, enemies, but this didn't feel right. He took a step back, scanned the hallway for security, and flagged a maintenance staffer. "I need this door opened. Now." The staffer hesitated, but the look on Jared's face erased any question of authority. With a key override, the door gave way, just enough for Jared to see the silver shimmer on the floor, a crumpled form, and then her. Amira, face pale, blood at the edge of her hairline, one arm bent unnaturally beneath her. "Call an ambulance." Jared barked. "Now." And chaos erupted. The emergency room was all fluorescent lights and rapid footsteps. Machines beeped, nurses moved with silent urgency, and Jared sat rigid in the waiting area, his fists clenched, his tailored jacket discarded and shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He'd ridden in the ambulance with Amira, pressing a towel against her head wound while whispering her name over and over. "You're okay. You're okay. Stay with me." But she never stirred. Not once. The attending physician, a short woman with kind but exhausted eyes, emerged after hours of observation. "She's stable," she said. "But unresponsive. No brain swelling, but she's concussed and severely dehydrated. She may have blacked out longer than we'd like." Jared nodded, silent. Nina and Keisha arrived, both shaking, barely holding it together. "She was fine," Nina kept repeating. "She was fine this morning." None of them asked where Damien was. None of them expected him to walk through those doors. Jared didn't even mention his name. But as he stood at Amira's bedside later that night, her hand resting cold in his, he whispered, whatever he did, "I swear to you, I won't let this go." The first day passed in stillness. The second, in fear. The third, in suspended hope. Jared never left. He canceled meetings, shut off his phone except to text Keisha updates, and turned down every call from Damien that came through the hospital switchboard. "He's asking questions," Keisha reported. "Wants to know who found her." Jared's voice was flat. "Tell him the truth. Let him worry." He kept his chair at Amira's side, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelashes fluttered occasionally, tiny signs of life that kept him grounded. Nurses began to whisper. Who was this man who never left her side, who brought fresh lilies to the room, who spoke to her as if she were listening? They didn't know the full story. But Jared did. And as he held her hand one more time that night, gently brushing his thumb over her fingers, he whispered into the sterile silence, "Come back to me, Amira. Not just for justice, but because I need to hear your voice tell me everything." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amira's mind was already waking up, slowly rising from the dark, holding every memory like shards of glass ready to be pieced together. On the morning of the third day, just as sunlight began bleeding through the hospital blinds, Amira's fingers twitched. A faint, almost imperceptible movement, like a whisper from beneath the surface. Jared had been dozing off in the corner chair, head tilted back, tie undone, eyes shadowed with fatigue. But that small motion snapped him awake. He rushed to her side, taking her hand, eyes wide. "Amira?" Her lids fluttered, the muscles around her eyes tightening before she winced slightly. "Amira, it's me. You're safe." She opened her mouth to speak, but only a rasp came out. A nurse entered at the perfect moment and hurried to call the doctor. Jared leaned in close. "You've been asleep. You fainted. You were hurt. But you're going to be okay." Her gaze, hazy but focused, landed on him, and then the tears came, silent, slow, almost confused. Her voice was dry but deliberate. "He hit me. Damien hit me. And left." It was the first time Jared had ever seen rage and heartbreak cross his face at once. Later that evening, after her vitals stabilized and sedatives wore off, Amira recounted everything. She spoke in fragments at first, flashes of the argument, the coldness in Damien's eyes, the weight of the door locking behind her. Jared listened without interruption, his jaw clenched, eyes never leaving hers. When she hesitated, he encouraged gently, "You don't need to protect him anymore." Keisha and Nina arrived not long after, holding her hand as she repeated the story to them. Nina's face turned pale, and Keisha whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer and a curse wrapped in one. "We need to press charges," Nina said sharply. "You have to." But Amira didn't answer right away. She simply stared at the ceiling, letting the sterile air of the hospital fill the silence. Jared stood by the window, arms crossed. "Let me handle the legalities. But you need to be ready for what comes next." Amira nodded slowly. "He left me to die," she whispered. "I won't let him get away with it." What none of them knew was that Damien had already begun to cover his tracks, calls made, surveillance erased, a statement prepared. But guilt? That was harder to delete. Damien was unraveling. When his calls to the hospital were blocked and no one from the firm returned his texts, he sensed the shift. Giselle, who had been riding high off her perceived victory, now grew uneasy watching him pace the length of his condo like a trapped animal. "Why are you acting like this?" she snapped. "You said she was fine, just fainted." Damien turned to her, eyes bloodshot. She woke up. Giselle froze. "How do you know?" "Because Jared knows. And Jared never lets anything slide." Panic bled into his voice now. He's not just her boss. He was there. He found her. Giselle stepped back slightly, the color draining from her face. "You said she hit her head. That it was an accident." "It was," Damien muttered, though even he no longer believed it. "She pushed me too far. I didn't mean to." He stopped. Giselle didn't respond. She just stared at him like she was seeing the man behind the mask for the first time. And in that moment, she began to wonder if she had just aligned herself with a sinking ship. The corporate boardroom of Armitage & Cole was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. Jared Kane, sharp in a tailored navy suit, stood at the head of the long obsidian table, surrounded by the firm's senior partners, legal advisors, and HR executives. Behind him, a flat-screen monitor displayed a redacted police report and hospital documentation. "Before we begin," Jared said, his tone calm but cold, "Mr. Crestwood will be joining us shortly." The elevator chimed moments later, and Damien walked in, shoulders squared, oblivious to the silence that greeted him. "Did I miss something?" he asked with a forced smile. Jared didn't smile back. "You missed the opportunity to resign quietly." Damien froze, eyes flicking from face to face. "What is this?" Jared stepped forward. "An investigation. An internal ethics breach. An external criminal assault case." The words echoed like a gavel. Damien's pulse pounded. "You're firing me?" Jared corrected him without blinking. "No. We're burying you." Before Damien could respond, HR slid an envelope across the table, official termination paperwork, along with a restraining order and formal notification of a pending civil suit. The surveillance logs from the GALA had mysteriously gone missing, but Jared had anticipated that. He had first-hand testimony, a nurse's sworn affidavit, and Amira's detailed statement. Damien's mouth opened, but no words came. "You left a woman unconscious and locked her in a restroom," Jared continued, voice like steel. "You're not just a liability, you're a danger." Giselle's name was also mentioned, as she had knowingly helped Damien alter timelines and distract witnesses. Her contract had been suspended pending further investigation. "You're not indispensable, Damien," Jared finished. "You're replaceable. And you're done." Damien stood there, chest heaving, lips trembling with unspoken rage. The people he once commanded were now watching him like a criminal. And for the first time in his life, he had no strategy to recover. News of the scandal broke within hours. Blogs, financial publications, and corporate watchdog pages lit up with headlines, "Rising executive fired amid assault allegations." Screenshots of Damien and Giselle at the GALA circulated alongside snippets of Amira's hospitalization. Investors began to distance themselves. Clients pulled accounts. Sponsors canceled events. Damien's fall wasn't slow, it was seismic. Giselle tried calling him repeatedly, but he ignored her. Alone in his penthouse that evening, Damien stared out at the skyline, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and his phone in the other. His inbox flooded with legal notices. A subpoena for court. A pending criminal case. And worst of all, a photograph. Sent anonymously. It showed Amira in her hospital bed, eyes closed, with Jared Kane sitting at her side, hand gently holding hers. The caption was just one sentence: "You didn't break her. You freed her." Damien hurled the phone across the room, and for the first time, he screamed. The apartment was nothing like the home Amira once shared with Damien, and that was precisely the point. Tucked above a flower shop in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, it had exposed brick walls, tall windows, and a creaky wooden floor that sang beneath her steps. The air smelled of eucalyptus from the potted plants Keisha had insisted she keep by the balcony, and every corner had been arranged with care, her care. No one else's opinion. No one else's fingerprints. It was the first space she'd lived in where silence didn't feel like punishment. She began painting again, her canvases abstract and chaotic, like her emotions. Most nights, she played old jazz records, the scratchy voices of Billie Holiday and Chet Baker pouring out of her record player while she drank tea and stared at unfinished canvases. And every Thursday without fail, a bouquet of fresh lilies arrived at her doorstep, no note, no name, but she knew it was Jared. Jared Kane never pushed. He didn't pry or pontificate. He simply showed up, in small ways, in quiet gestures. One Sunday afternoon, he arrived unannounced with a paper bag of groceries. "I remember you said you like rosemary roasted potatoes and peach preserves," he said, lifting the items out like treasures. Amira was hesitant at first, grateful but guarded. But there was something disarming about the way he moved in her kitchen, like it wasn't foreign to him, how he peeled potatoes while humming under his breath. They didn't talk about Damien. Not that day. Instead, they talked about books, favorite meals, and how Jared used to play the saxophone in high school. "I was terrible," he laughed. "But it was the first time I felt like I had a voice." Amira smiled softly. "You still do." The walls she'd built weren't torn down, they were dissolving, bit by bit, under the warmth of something honest. She wasn't ready to call it love. But it was something close. Something sacred. That evening, as the sun dipped low and poured amber across her balcony, Amira stepped outside with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of tea in hand. Jared sat beside her, not too close, just enough. A soft jazz tune played from inside, Chet Baker's "I Fall in Love Too Easily." Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy. It was kind. "Do you ever miss her?" Amira asked, referring to Jared's late wife. His eyes dimmed, but he nodded. Every day. But grief doesn't mean there isn't room for something else to grow. Amira looked down at her tea, steam curling toward the stars. I'm still figuring out who I am without him. Jared turned to her gently. Good. Because that woman deserves the world. Not what's left of it. In that moment, for the first time in a long time, Amira didn't feel broken. She felt beginning. Damien sat alone in the dark, hunched over a glass of bourbon that had long gone warm, his once manicured penthouse now reeking of disarray, papers scattered, curtains drawn, and the silence suffocating. He hadn't shaved in days, hadn't answered calls, and the weight of his downfall pressed on his chest like a curse. The media had vilified him. Clients ghosted him. The firm disowned him. But it wasn't the world's judgment that kept him awake, it was the mirror. Because every time he looked into it, he saw his father. That same jaw clenched in anger. That same twitch when things didn't go his way. That same monstrous fury that once knocked his mother to the kitchen floor over burnt eggs. He'd sworn he'd never be like him. Sworn he'd never raise a hand, never abandon someone mid-pain. But he had. Worse, he'd left her there. And no matter how many statements his lawyer drafted, or how tightly he tried to control the narrative, he knew the truth. And it was unforgivable. Giselle's presence, once intoxicating, now grated on his nerves. She paced the condo with expensive slippers and cheap empathy, still trying to salvage her name through whispers and legal backdoors. We can still fight this, she said one evening, waving a mock-up of a PR redemption strategy. You can frame it as an emotional episode, a breakdown. People love a comeback. Damien barely looked up from the whiskey bottle. I didn't have a breakdown. I broke someone. Her face paled, and for the first time, she stopped talking. Giselle had gotten what she wanted, his attention, his access, her moment in the spotlight, but now that the light was burning them both, she realized too late that ambition had a price. Days later, she left a typed letter on his counter, "You're drowning, and I refuse to go under with you." She disappeared that same day, moved cities, scrubbed socials, gone without a trace. Damien didn't chase her. He didn't have the energy. Or the delusion. All he had was silence, and the ghost of a woman he once claimed to love, lying on a bathroom floor in a memory he could never erase. Across town, peace had found a different address. Jared, noticing how tightly Amira clung to control even in quiet moments, suggested a weekend getaway. Not a vacation, he said. Just space. For your soul. She hesitated but eventually agreed. They drove hours into the hills to a private lakeside retreat Jared had quietly owned for years, a place he hadn't returned to since his wife passed. The cabin was all wood and windows, with no reception and nothing but trees and water for miles. That night, wrapped in wool blankets under the stars, Amira breathed easier than she had in months. Do you think people like us, people who've been through storms, can really love again? She asked. Jared's answer was quiet, but sure. Not in the same way. In a better one. They didn't kiss that night. Didn't touch. Just stayed beside one another as the fire crackled, letting the warmth between them speak a language neither had dared to believe in again. Yet. The lake was still at dawn, blanketed in a pale mist that made the world look half awake, half dreaming. Amira stood barefoot on the deck of the winterlight cabin, wrapped in Jared's oversized flannel shirt, watching a ripple stretch across the water from a single falling leaf. Behind her, Jared emerged with 2 mugs of coffee, the steam curling between them like unsaid words. They hadn't spoken much since the night before. Not because there was tension, but because something had settled between them. Something tender and unshakably real. I used to think love meant losing yourself in someone, Amira said, cradling the warm mug between her hands. But now, I think love might be the place you go to find yourself again. Jared looked at her, the rising sun catching in his eyes. You found pieces of yourself in your darkest hour. That kind of light doesn't fade, Amira. It spreads. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something inside her shifted. They spent the day walking the wooded trails behind the cabin, talking about childhood dreams, favorite authors, irrational fears. Amira confessed she used to be terrified of thunderstorms because they reminded her of her parents' worst arguments. Jared admitted he still left a light on in his house at night, not out of fear, but because the darkness reminded him of the hospital room he last held his wife's hand in. These weren't the stories people told on dates. These were the truths we only share with the ones who've already seen our shadows. As twilight fell and the stars emerged one by one, they built a fire by the dock, sipping mulled wine from copper cups. Jared reached over and tucked a strand of Amira's hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I've cared about you since that dinner," he said softly. "Long before I had the right to." Amira's breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but recognition. "You see me," she whispered. "Every version of me." Jared nodded. And then, finally, he kissed her. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate or dramatic. It was slow, intentional, and so deeply gentle that it made Amira forget every time she had been touched with force, indifference, or obligation. This was different. It was a promise disguised as a question: can we begin again, on our own terms? When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, and the world fell quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. "You're not broken," Jared said. "You were buried." Amira smiled faintly, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "And you helped me dig my way out." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. They just sat together under the starlit canopy, wrapped in warmth and something new, something that didn't demand or diminish, but simply existed. The kind of peace that comes after a storm. The kind of peace you stop running from because it finally feels like home. The courtroom was colder than Amira expected, its air sterile, its silence thick with anticipation. She sat upright in her navy suit, hands folded in her lap, every inch of her posture controlled. To her right, Nina gripped her hand with silent strength, while Keisha sat behind them, arms crossed and eyes sharp, a fortress in heels. Jared was already inside when she arrived, seated at the far back corner with his legal team, his presence quiet but unmissable. On the opposite side of the aisle, Damien Crestwood looked nothing like the man who once stood at podiums, commanding boardrooms. His tailored suit couldn't hide the weight loss, the shaking knee, or the way his eyes avoided hers. The prosecution opened with photos of Amira's injuries, medical statements, and the recorded testimony of the emergency responders. Her own voice, pre-recorded to spare her from direct cross-examination, played through the courtroom speakers, steady and clear. "He shoved me. I lost consciousness. He left me to die." No one in the room breathed as the words echoed. When the defense attempted to pivot, painting Damien as a stressed executive under emotional strain, the jury's eyes narrowed. They called his behavior a moment of weakness. But it was Giselle's testimony that shattered whatever sympathy might have remained. Subpoenaed after weeks of dodging service, she took the stand reluctantly. Her story cracked under pressure, admitting she'd helped Damien craft an alibi, delete messages, and delay emergency responders under the pretense that Amira was just being dramatic. Under oath, she faltered, and finally said, "He told me he thought she'd wake up on her own. That it wasn't serious." Gasps filled the room. The judge struck the gavel twice to restore order. Giselle was charged with obstruction. Damien's lawyers requested a recess, but it was clear there was no recovery from this. When the prosecution rested, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived in silence, carrying handcuffs and cold metal chairs. And when the verdict came back, guilty on all charges, including felony assault and reckless endangerment, Amira didn't cry. She simply nodded once, her spine straight, as if reclaiming every inch of herself he'd ever tried to bend. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Questions flew. Microphones angled toward her face. "Amira, how do you feel? Will you press civil charges next? Was Jared Kane with you through all of this?" She didn't speak at first. Then, calmly, she said, "This isn't about revenge. This is about truth." She turned, walking down the courthouse steps as camera shutters clicked like thunder. Jared joined her halfway down, offering his hand, not as a savior, but as an equal. She took it. Nina and Keisha followed closely, forming a quiet wall of solidarity. That evening, as the sun dipped over the courthouse, Amira did something deeply symbolic. She opened her jewelry box, pulled out her wedding ring, the same one she had worn through years of silence, and dropped it into an envelope. She mailed it to the women's shelter downtown, along with a note that read, "To whoever needs it next, may it come with healing, not pain." In that single act, Amira let go of her past and stepped fully into her power. 1 year later, Amira stood before the ornate doors of the Grand Lysandra Hotel, the very place where her life had nearly ended. A charity gala was underway, this time hosted by a domestic violence advocacy group, and she had been invited as a silent benefactor, not a victim. The lobby shimmered as before, but this time, it no longer held ghosts. Dressed in an elegant navy gown that hugged her form like a second skin, she walked with poise and intention, her heels echoing against the marble like a declaration. Jared walked beside her, not behind, not leading, just beside. As they entered the grand ballroom, eyes turned, but not with pity. They turned in admiration. No one whispered scandal. No one asked for her story. Because her presence told it all, a woman who had faced death in silence and returned not just alive, but awakened. She wasn't there for revenge or recognition. She was there for herself. Midway through the evening, Amira excused herself from a conversation with the mayor's wife and made her way down the familiar hallway. Her fingers brushed against the same wall she'd leaned on that night. When she reached the private bathroom, the door now repainted and repaired, she paused. She opened it slowly, stepping inside. The mirror above the sink, once bloodstained and cracked, now gleamed. She stared at her reflection for a long moment. Her eyes no longer looked hollow. Her skin glowed. Her expression was calm but fierce, like a flame that had learned to burn without destroying itself. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a small gold lipstick tube, plum red, like war paint, and applied it slowly, deliberately. The woman who had once crumbled on this floor was gone. In her place stood a survivor, a fighter, a creator of her own narrative. She smiled at her reflection, not to admire beauty, but to acknowledge rebirth. As she stepped out, Jared was waiting. "You okay?" he asked, studying her face. She nodded, linking her arm with his. "I just needed to see her one more time," she said. "The woman I used to be." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. As they walked back toward the ballroom, a young reporter approached with a notepad. "Miss Sullivan," she began. "Can I ask who you are?" Jared looked at Amira, letting her answer for herself. Amira turned, smiled softly, and said, "I'm the woman who walked into fire and taught it how to warm me instead of burn me." The reporter blinked, speechless. Jared chuckled under his breath. And as they disappeared into the velvet-lit room, Amira felt no need to look back. She had already buried the ashes. Now, she was the flame. The space was once a rundown craft store on the corner of Everglade and Kingman, but now it breathed with intention. Natural light flooded the high-ceilinged room through arched windows, illuminating art-lined walls, soft linen couches, and tall indoor plants that whispered serenity. Amira had named it the Haven. It wasn't just a boutique gallery, it was a healing space. A curated blend of art therapy, support circles, and creative workshops for women who had walked through shadows and come out stronger. Keisha had designed the interior, bringing in soft lighting and earth tones, while Nina held monthly empowerment talks in a cozy corner surrounded by bookshelves and beanbags. Jared had funded the launch quietly, never asking for public credit. Instead, he focused on logistics, legalities, and offering her space when she needed it most. But this place, it was Amira's. Her dream. Not built in spite of pain, but because of it. A place where other women could begin again too. The grand opening was intimate but powerful. Former clients, survivors, artists, and friends gathered under twinkling lanterns as a local saxophonist played mellow jazz. Amira moved through the crowd in a cream jumpsuit, barefoot, grounded. She laughed fully now, real, open laughter that had been absent from her life for far too long. Jared stood across the room, sipping coffee and watching her with quiet reverence. Later that evening, as the final guests trickled out, he approached her with a blank canvas in one hand and a paintbrush tied with a silk ribbon in the other. "I know you're not one for rings," he said softly. "But maybe we could paint something together?" Amira's eyes welled with emotion, not from pain, but from a joy that didn't need validation. "You're not proposing perfection," she whispered. "You're proposing partnership." Jared nodded. "No promises to fix you. Just a promise to honor you while you grow." She accepted, not the brush, but everything it symbolized. As they stood in the center of the haven, hands locked, hearts unguarded, Amira felt a stillness inside her that she hadn't known in years. She had lost much, love, trust, time, but gained something rare in return, the right to choose her own ending. Damien was nothing more than a cautionary echo now, a scar healed over. Giselle had vanished from the headlines and from relevance. And Amira? She was no longer surviving. She was living, deeply and intentionally. Outside, the sky bloomed in shades of lavender and rose as dusk settled over the city. Amira stepped onto the sidewalk barefoot, the cool concrete grounding her as the breeze lifted her curls. She closed her eyes, breathed in deeply, and smiled, not because life was perfect, but because it was hers now. And as she turned to re-enter the sanctuary she had built from the ashes, she whispered to the universe with full clarity, "This is not a comeback. This is my beginning." The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment, and also share to your loved ones or anyone who might be interested. Turn on post notification after subscribing so you get informed on our next video. Thank you, and I'd see you next time. Bye for now.